Hello, and welcome to Verifi Insights Podcast, Verifi's audio blog featuring timely insights from leading experts in payments, fraud reduction, and dispute prevention. We've gathered our expert forces together to provide you a global view on payment protection and share tips that support your kind of business, big or small, in all kinds of industries. From SMBs to enterprise, Verifi Insights Podcast is your source for information on VIP payment protection. Hello, and welcome to Verifi Insights Podcast. I am your host, Rene Garcia. Today, I want to talk to you about a brand new product that Verifi is launching very soon. It's called Rapid Dispute Resolution. And to tell us more about it is our guest, Hitesh Anand, Chief Product Officer at Verifi. Hitesh, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rene. Thank you for having me here.
It's our pleasure. So before we begin, can you give us a little background on yourself? How did you get into the payments industry? Why did you focus on technology in particular?
So Rene, it's funny you asked that because I look at me being in the payment industry from a very circuitous route. So I came here. I'm a mobile engineer and a mobile product manager by training. I was at Nokia where I was trying to extend Nokia's reach in other vertical areas, and one of them was financial services. And so to build a product for the emerging markets with Nokia for financial services is how I came into the space. So very circuitous route. I tell folks that it's like crossing a stream, and when you look back, you see that you have crossed the stream, but every next step you take is taking you closer towards the next bend. So that's how I came to the payment industry.
You're obviously the right person to help get rapid dispute resolution off the ground. So as I mentioned earlier, it is very close to launching. Can you give us a high-level overview of the product and how it works in terms of disputes and the payments ecosystem?
Absolutely, Rene. So rapid dispute resolution, as the name suggests, it is a model where a consumer dispute is resolved rapidly by way of a seller or a merchant giving predefined rules to verify. And typically when a consumer calls in as a cardholder of an issuer to the bank and says, I have a problem with this particular transaction, real or perceived, that's when the whole dispute process starts. And what rapid dispute resolution does is, in the scenarios where the seller is willing to accept the liability and refund the consumer, rather than taking it all the way through the dispute process to become a chargeback and then do a refund, the seller is able now to rapidly resolve that at the very beginning stage of inquiry for the consumer, helping not only the consumer, but the issuer and themselves.
So before we dive deeper into RDR, can you describe the payments landscape and how sellers and issuers handle disputes prior to RDR?
Absolutely. So today, when you look at the credit card network, right, it's a multi-party system. There is an issuer, there's an acquiring bank, and then there is the seller. And typically what happens is that the consumer, who is a consumer, the seller and the issuer, when they have a problem, when they have an issue with a transaction on their card, they contact the issuer. It flows all the way through the acquirer to the seller and then back. That's how the current dispute resolution process works. And in general, from a payment perspective, the sellers are the acquirer's customer. They allow the different issuing banks to transact with the networks being in the play. So from the ecosystem perspective, it's the issuer, the card network, the acquirer, and the seller.
You've just mentioned the players in the payments ecosystem. Was there any technology developed to get them to communicate before a formal chargeback could be submitted? Were there any competing products?
So Rene, yes, there were a few competing and legacy products from Ethica and Verifi's own legacy seeded product as part of Resolve that we currently have as well. CDR in particular allowed pre-disputes to be directed by participating issuers to the respective merchants. Those cases would be paused for 72 hours, allowing the sellers or the resellers to resolve those cases on behalf of the consumer, and then not let them go through the chargeback process. So there were existing products in the market, but RDR takes it to a whole new level.
And you may have already touched on this, but how does RDR fit into the dispute resolution process?
So as I explained earlier, Renee, what RDR does is it takes the resolution of a dispute which a seller would have done at the late stage of the process. So today, when a consumer has an issue, it comes through as a chargeback to the seller via the acquirer. And at that point, if the chargeback is a valid chargeback, meaning, for example, the goods were sold but were not received properly, or the goods were sold but a different item was received, the seller does indeed resolve that dispute in favor of the consumer. But at that end of the flow, the seller is also dinged with being, adding that particular transaction to the dispute ratio, meaning how many total payments the seller had that resulted in a dispute. And so what RDR does is, and how it fits into the current process is, the scenarios where the seller would have resolved in favor of the consumer, RDR takes that to the very beginning of the process and helps resolve it at the very beginning stage of inquiry, not at the last stage of chargeback.
Got it. So you've already mentioned, at least on a high level, one of the scenarios where RDR would fit. Can you give us a few more scenarios?
Couple scenarios depending upon the company, the vertical. Very typical scenario is, for example, my son plays a lot of video games, and what happens is he uses to buy a game that I allow him. And sometimes either arrogantly or he buys a game that I did not allow him. That results in a dispute. And so in this scenario, the reason I don't allow him that game because the game was mature. And so that dispute would more often than not result in me getting a refund because the game was not intended for him. Other scenarios are, specifically in the example that I'm giving, in the word game industry, the game is valid, but the system that he is using cannot play the game, and so there's a refund. So certain scenarios where it is easy for a seller to say, "Yep, if this rule applies, then I want to do a refund with an RDR rule," is how RDR comes into play very beautifully. There are other verticals as well for other digital goods, for other physical goods, where certain rules can be applied and resolved immediately at the stage of inquiry.
Okay, fantastic. So it sounds like both issuers and sellers can benefit greatly by using RDR. But what's the cardholder experience like?
Absolutely. Absolutely great, right? So think about this. Today, when a cardholder has a problem with something on their card, the issuer will say, "Yep, we have taken we'll reverse the transaction, but you don't know. We reverse the transaction, but we'll follow it up. And if it is in your benefit, you will actually get the funds back. And if the seller says otherwise, then we have a second reissue." In case of RDR, the consumer knows upfront that this particular issue has been resolved, and that's it. So customer experience is now taken care of by having it resolved at the very beginning inquiry stage, not for the consumer to wait and say, "Yep, my funds have been reversed," but they can still be reversed back. So from a consumer perspective, customer perspective, cardholder perspective, if I'm the seller's customer, I view it as an awesome seller experience that has been extended to the issuer call center. From a issuer customer, cardholder, I view it as an amazing response by my issuer. And if I am a Visa user, I see an awesome benefit of the network that I'm transacting on. So all in all, amazing customer or cardholder experience.
Well, fantastic. Is there a unique experience for the acquirer?
So the acquirer today gets the chargeback And what the acquirer will get tomorrow with RDR will still get the same transaction network, but with the new identifier. So a particular acquirer would know that this particular issue had a potential to become a chargeback or a dispute, but was resolved using RDR. So the acquirer would know how many were resolved at the very beginning stage, and those particular disputes they should not send forward for a chargeback resolution.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So, Hitesh, I want to ask you more about the history of RDR, but before I do that, I want to remind our listeners that the Verifi Insights podcast is brought to you by Verifi, the leader in total dispute management. For help with your business's disputes, make sure to visit verifi.com. That's verifi.com. Once again, that's Verifi, Verifi.com. I'm talking to Hitesh Anand, Chief Product Officer at Verifi. Hitesh, we've been discussing the benefits of rapid dispute resolution, but I want to take a step back and cover the history of the product. What was the impetus behind rapid dispute resolution? Who thought it up and why?
Excellent question, Renee. So RDR came about as a Visa network option to provide an expedited or a fast resolution for a dispute, as I mentioned earlier. But what I did not clarify earlier, that this allows a seller not to handle the off-network refund of a transaction. So what it means is, if a seller today were to do a refund, they have to go offline, do a manual refund, and then come back. So RDR came about us observing the pain points of the sellers who want to resolve the issues in favor of their customers or the issuer's cardholders, but have to have an overhead of a manual overhead of review and then a manual overhead of refunding. And so RDR came about as the observation of the CDRN process that sellers were doing. Secondly, we also, with Verifi CDRN, we learned that while the sellers were reviewing these cases manually, they're actually applying certain rules. So we realized that not only the sellers are applying rules, but they were also going offline refund. What if with Verifi and Visa coming together, we could bring these two in a seamless solution that allowed the seller to set up a rule upfront and also made sure that Visa would use the existing network rails to do an automated refund back to the customer, thereby resolving the seller's twin pain point. So that's how the idea about RDR came about, Renee.
Got it. Okay, so did RDR require the development of any new technology, or is this the result of existing technology used in a new way?
So RDR required us to build something new. It required us to build an amazing rules engine. It allowed we had to build the notion of seller having control at the of the flow, which meant it interacted with the Visa process when a consumer calls. So we had to build RDR on our side, on the Verifi side for the sellers, on the Visa side for the issuers. However, it leverages the existing payment rails. So from a payment ecosystem perspective, it has no disruption. So it sits on top of the existing payment rails. The refunds that are done automatically are based on existing TC15 message, so it does not disrupt anything existing that is working for the sellers, the acquirers, and the customers and the issuers.
So it seems like, as we continue this conversation, it seems like that RDR is such an obvious product that can benefit every seller and issuer. So why did it take Visa to invent it and bring it to market?
Sometimes, Renee, the obvious is not so obvious. So in some ways, I would say Verifi had known the obvious. Verifi's legacy CDRN product is a way to take that obvious and resolve it. So CDRN, for our listeners who don't know, which is one of Verifi's legacy product, allows an issuer who uses Verifi to send a dispute at the pre-dispute stage before they submit it to the acquirer as a chargeback and give the sellers 72 hours to resolve the dispute. So Verifi had observed that pain point earlier in the payment ecosystem. We had built our own closed loop network to resolve that. We had sellers and we had issuers. When we became part of Visa, it became more apparent that what if we took our CDRN card agnostic product and fitted it in the existing Visa rails to make that card agnostic product work in much more seamless manner for the Visa transactions. So that's how, even though it was obvious, it took us some time to fit it in to become automatic for Visa transactions and Visa issuers globally.
So how easy is it for issuers and sellers to get started with RDR? Is there an integration process? What are the requirements?
So for the issuers, there is no integration process. The issuer is using the Visa Resolve online system. They have to turn it on. Obviously, they have to do some other internal training. So potentially every global Visa issuer in the world can use RDR. From a seller perspective, there is no integration required because we have the rules set on Verifi system. So all the sellers to do is to set up some rules. However, some sellers may choose to do some work on their end to consume the RDR case resolution file that is generated on a daily basis, depending upon their internal CRMs to make sure they are matching the resolved cases. But to start using RDR day one, there is no integration required for the seller.
So it sounds like RDR will only be available to Visa issuers at launch, but what's available to non-Visa issuers?
Good question, Renee. As you know, that Verifi is committed to being a card brand agnostic solution to accommodate all sellers and all different card brands in its solution for resolve, prevent, inform, and recover. So for our non-Visa issuers who are either direct to Verifi or who will connect through us using VROL, CDRN remains and is and will be an option for those issuers, which essentially means that a pre-dispute coming in through CDRN for non-Visa transactions will be available to our sellers who would then have 72 hours to resolve it manually and then either resolve in lieu of the cardholder by accepting liability or declining it. So CDRN does remain an option. We do plan to incorporate the RDR solution for our non-Visa transactions as well in the future. But for now, RDR is issuers for Visa issuers only, whereas CDRN, our other resolved product, remains and will be there for Visa and non-Visa issuers at the same time.
Okay, so it sounds like you already started to talk about what the process is like for setting up the rules. Can you drill down a little deeper? Is it difficult? What kind of rules can be defined?
So the rules, how the rules are set up is Verifi would provide the sellers with a list of rules, a list of parameters, a sheet where the sellers can enter them. So for example, a rule could be, I want to refund transactions below $5 that happen in the US, for example. So that could be a very simple rule the seller may set up. Now the rules are set up at the BIN and CADE level. BIN is a bank identifying number and CADE is a card descriptor ID that is given to the sellers by their acquirers. Depending upon the seller, the vertical, a seller may have more than one BIN combination, and a seller can choose to set up the rules that are same across all BIN and CADEs or different for different BIN and CADEs if they want to do different resolutions for different verticals or different line of businesses. So that's how the rules per BIN and CADE get around 7 parameters. and give it to Verify, and Verify support would enter the rules in Verify system, and voila, from then on, the system is working for them and resolving cases at the stage of inquiry.
That sounds very straightforward. So solutions like RDR can be disruptive to the status quo. How do you think issuers, acquirers, and sellers are going to react to this new innovation?
So disruptions can be, can move the status quo. In this case, this is a disruption, a revolution, and an evolution. The revolution is that we are giving the power to the seller to resolve the issues at the very beginning of the stage, not at the end of the stage of the dispute process they do today. The evolution is that we have made sure that it works on existing network rails, use the existing acquirer process, uses the existing TC15 messages to refund, so as to not make the work of the ecosystem any harder. So in that sense, I think both the issuers, the acquirers, and the sellers are going to react very positively to this innovation. From the ecosystem perspective, the work change is minimal, the disruption is minimal, the benefit is to a large extent positive, highly positive.
So do you think that consumers are going to notice the benefit or the change in the dispute process, or is this something that works to improve their experience without them really noticing?
It depends. I think the consumers will definitely notice something has changed, because now when they call, they will be told immediately, yep, this particular issue has been resolved, and they can see the refund in the next n number of days. So consumers will notice that the resolution of the cases are a lot more positive and done, versus we will resolve it and then we'll fight with the seller, will let us know, and back and forth. However, I think the consumers may gloss it over and say, yeah, my issuer is providing me with a better experience. So they may not know that the seller actually has chosen to give that better experience in conjunction with the issuer for the consumer as a whole, who's both the seller consumer and the issuer consumer. That's something the consumers may not know, but they will definitely see a benefit. They'll notice a benefit. The cases are resolved much faster, much sooner, and they don't have to wait anymore.
So after all of this, can you give us exact dates on availability?
So our product is launching in July as a beta, but general availability is August 10th of this year.
Something to look forward to. Hitesh, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Renee, I just want to recap and reemphasize the benefits of RDR. The RDR, as I've explained, is a rapid dispute resolution, which allows the seller to set up the rules so that their consumer issues are resolved at the stage of inquiry versus the last stage of dispute at the period, right? So that's the core benefit. And the other big benefit is, as a seller, it reduces the manual overhead of reviewing cases, and it also reduces the manual overhead of doing a manual refund by using the existing TC15 rails to do refunds automatically. So all in all, a huge positive benefit for the sellers, a huge positive benefit for the consumers and for the issuers.
All right. Well, Hitesh, thank you so much for joining us today. And for our listeners, we will see you in the next episode. We're glad you joined us to share important payment information on Verifi Insights Podcast. You can stay informed on the latest insights on dispute prevention and payment industry changes by listening to our podcast regularly. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube or tap into your favorite online place for podcasts to help keep you protected and informed. Want to share this wealth of information with your friends and colleagues? Send them a link on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to spread the good news. And if you're ready to learn more about how Verifi can help your business reduce fraud, prevent and resolve disputes, and recover revenue lost to disputes, visit us today at verifi.com. That's Verifi.com.